There's also a split that's going on now, and I remember when Mo was talking 10 years ago, there was a lot of angst in the industry about home centers and Home Depot and Lowe's, and they got into the electrical business, and there were, at the time, there were a number of distributors that were very upset about manufacturers selling directly to that. And it seems today, you know, when people talk about Amazon and the rest of it, fundamentally, customers have more places that they can go to get products, and the customers seem to be aligning differently. Some customers, I mean, is that small owner operator going to have a smaller market they can sell to? I mean, where's all this going to sort out with the customers? Are you buying anything from Home Depot?
No, but the problem with Home Depot is it's easy to look up online what the price of a receptacle is, and when we price a change order or something like that, we run up against that issue all the time. And you forget, well, what about service? What about delivery? And, in the end, we still need people to talk to. Whether, I told you earlier about I'm building a house with LED lights, right? And that's been nothing but a disaster.
Well, actually, so, add a bit of color. I think they would enjoy it.
Yeah, so of the 60 downlights, and I don't have a big home, but 60 downlights is enough. 50 of them had bad drivers, and I had to change them all out. But anyhow, long story short, now I have an appreciation of what our project managers go through day in and day out, and what you guys deal with day in and day out, and what a pain in the ass lighting has become.
That's a technical consulting term.
Yeah, I'm a contractor, I can say that. But in the end, you got a Home Depot, you got an Amazon, you have no service, right? So if somebody in this room or on this board could figure out lighting, we've gone from a 5-line item spec to a 100-line item spec on projects. Wow. And it is just, it consumes our business, and it is all of the energy our purchasing department spends is on lighting. So I don't think you get the service from an Amazon. And as you talk about, big majors, and don't throw tomatoes at me, sometimes we feel the smaller, local, privately owned businesses can be a little bit more nimble and a little bit more responsive to the quick changes in the industry than some of the big majors. And so, we're all about service. We're all about working with relationships because in the end, when push comes to shove and you need an answer, you need an answer.
I completely agree with what you said. When Google first launched a Nexus phone for consumers, they forgot to set up a customer support line. Because why would a bunch of engineers using an engineered product ever have a question? So I think, Amazon, Google, a lot of the business to consumer outlets are very, very good and very, very efficient at the logistics of giving you what you want when you know exactly what you need without a lot of service behind it.
Do that one more time.
Exactly what you want and exactly how you need it without a lot of service behind it. So if it's a transaction, you know your size and you know exactly what you need. And literally, it's the everything store, right? So that's from a book to, electrical supplies. But the minute you get into configuration and interoperability and domain knowledge, that's not it. Their business models don't scale to support that. So I think now, how do we learn from their experiences in terms of doing things more quickly, making it easier? There's a tool set absolutely you can absorb, but will those businesses fundamentally change and provide this level of configuration support? I don't see that happening.
Interesting. Brian, you look like you got a take on this.
I never count them out. I don't count out Home Depot. I don't count out Amazon. They'll continue to evolve. You think about the products that we serve, the solutions we're trying to provide, the tools that they can create. I think we all have to be looking over our shoulder and keep our eye on that. This industry, for me, is brand new, but many of the products that I see on my distribution shelves are products that look pretty similar to the ones that were built in my house, and my house was built in the 50s. So, some of that stuff looks remarkably the same. Yet, there's a lot of new technology, and the product life cycle of this new technology is very different than the product life cycles of some of the old technology. And as that change, it's going to create new dynamics, and getting that new technology to market and staying ahead of the market. There could be some competitors out there that we really need to think about that could get ahead of us before we're ready to get there ourselves. So I still worry about those players, and for those of you that follow Amazon, they've made changes even as recent as a month ago and their new offering, their new stores. So they're a monster, and they're quite happy to do a lot of things and not make a lot of money. And I always worry about that.
My son lives in Austin, Texas, is an engineer, and like many engineers, you can always tell an engineer, you just can't tell him much. And so he sent me an ad from Amazon that they're doing a pilot in Austin with 2-hour delivery, as long as he orders over $50. And he's making the point that in Melbourne, not so much where I live. So, David?
Well, I can imagine that the scale of some of the size and scale that some of these companies are growing to, it's hard to be able to deliver consistent service across that whole footprint. And I mean, I know how hard it is for us in 2 states to try and offer consistent services across our footprint. So what makes me feel a little bit good from an independent distributor standpoint is that we can outservice and sometimes overservice a given market to stay competitive.
Which raises cost as well.
It does.
So much like David was talking about. Well, what's your take?
Yeah, I think there's a large difference between a business to consumer to a business to business relationship, and I think the way that a consumer purchases things will always evolve, a little differently than a business does. But there's certainly a lot of things to look out for with what some of these companies do, and all the analytics and all the data that they have, and all that they can produce. But as we talked about earlier, if you continue to build that value. I mean, 10 years ago, we weren't parallel cable and cutting wire for a contractor before we shipped it to them. So in today's world, we're putting parallel cable runs on a truck, the exact cuts they want. They pull
You
it
can
right
do
to
that?
the country. We can do that. Wow. I'll be in Chicago next week if you want to talk, Dave.
David's current suppliers are now nervous because Walt's going to go after it. Well, but that's just sort of a natural evolution. I mean, but that's as the distributor takes on more of the service. It's basically, as a contractor, you're outsourcing a lot of that, so you can get there faster. Talk to me about, in terms of these changes, what other changes or what other forces might be affecting us? Everybody talks about technology and the rest of it. I had a conversation at the bar last night, which is where I do some of my best research, and I was sitting with a Generation Xer, and I think there's going to be some big changes in people, So what are some? I mean, besides people, what other things might be coming at us that maybe aren't on the radar screen like Amazon is?
Well, like I mentioned, I think the energy landscape itself is going to change. I think, utilities and how they interact and how energy is distributed and stored. I think the impact of solar. And understand that this is a cycle that goes through in big shifts. So 100 years ago, right here in Chicago, ComEd was being formed. There was the standard wars between AC and DC. There was discussions of whether you have big centralized power distribution or distributed power management. Cloud computing has done the same thing in technology. Telecoms went through the same change. So, going back from centralized to distributed energy management, I think is a big trend. We all need to follow that. The other one outside of just technology is 3D printing. Can you actually print a part on site? Not for the next 5 years, but 10 years, 15 years, who knows?
I had somebody printed me. I had a 3D printed meal a while back. It was a little scary. It tasted okay. I wasn't quite sure.
It'll take a while.
I wasn't quite sure what I was eating.
Since all the electrical, I'm surrounded, I know very little about electrical, and I'm surrounded by experts, but I'll give another parallel story from the electronics industry. So between the late 90s and early 2000s, and actually Amr is very familiar with this, the electronics manufacturing services industry began to grow and really began to explode. And between that 6-year time frame, 40% of the manufacturing business in the United States moved from the United States to Asia. And for us as distributors of electronic components, we were basically, our profit model was built by designing in the supplier's technology to the OEM, so think of Cisco and Apple and people who make electronic devices, but our pay was selling it to the manufacturer that was building it. And so now we were in a world where the designs were being done in San Jose and Boston in the United States, but the production was being done in Shenzhen, China, and in other places. And so we had to scramble to create a model where we could hire and deploy engineers in high-cost markets like San Francisco and Boston and get paid for our services by shipping products at somewhat squeezed margins in Shenzhen, China, and other low-cost manufacturing centers. So think about the parallel to the electrical industry. If our customers can find a way, David mentioned prefab earlier, I mean, maybe is there some way that someone could come in with a solution? And I see some of the solutions that our suppliers are creating that are really making the job of putting these things together much, much easier, taking cost out as everybody squeezes that labor dollar. And if the labor dollar can be done in China, where the labor rate is, sub $2 versus the United States, potentially there's 10 years from now, there's a threat looming around the corner that we really need to think about.
David, you look like you got something to say there.
Well, kind of on top of what Brian said, I had a contractor, we were at an outing a couple weeks ago, and he said, so, Dave, I always felt good about telling young people about the labor market in construction, that the good news is the people in China can't build a hospital and ship it to the United States. He says, furniture and textiles, sure, they can do that. He says, then I watched this YouTube video where they built this modular advanced manufacturing type 57-story high-rise in less than 6 months. He says, I'm not sure I can tell them that anymore.
My grandfather always said, "Can't never did nothing." So, don't ever take anything for granted.
Can't never did nothing?
That's right.
I'm going to
He's a
steal
simple
that.
guy,
Yeah.
But and all my drivers for my LEDs were made in China too. So I don't know. I'm not so big about that. But,
That'll work out for you.
yeah, not so good. From my seat at the table, the holy grail of the electrical industry is all about high-capacity battery storage. And if you think about where that goes, whether it's Elon Musk who's going to figure it out, or you get bi-directional metering. So now when your Tesla is sitting in your parking or in your garage overnight, the utility can draw from you. We put a high-capacity battery storage and solar installation in our office. None of the renewables make sense, quite frankly, right now without battery storage. So you guys probably see it. That's where all the money is being spent from R&D standpoint, I think, in the electrical industry, or a lot of it.
So what's a distributor supposed to do? Just wait till somebody comes out and go, I got really cool battery packs, and let's do a promo and a blitz and sell it? Or, I mean, how do you get ahead of this or keep up with it? It seems like what do we do?
Good question, Mike.
That wasn't on the list of questions, Mike.
The thing is, we get started, but I mean, the thing that's really kind of interesting to me, just listening to this conversation, is the amount of uncertainty, and then it's uncertainty, but there's large consequences, like with the battery and distributed power. And then the thing that I hadn't really thought about until just this morning is how fast all this can happen. Because I started to think back to my experience in electronics, and we didn't see it at the time, but it's like it took no time at all.
Yeah. I mean, the powerful thing about the industry, the electrical industry, I mean, there's a lot of very seasoned players here, and this industry, it didn't get as large as it is with as many strong players as it has, being run by people who weren't afraid of change. And so I look around the industry, and there's many worthy competitors, but the key is to move and move fast. So if battery storage is the play, then we better get on our horse and develop an offering for battery storage, because it'll come, to your point, it'll come faster than we think. And we have a team working on it right now.
The other thing, and David mentioned this earlier, from a manufacturing standpoint, we think about our distribution partners as an extension of our capacity in the market. And so for us to introduce a new product and not spend a lot of time preparing and making sure that the business model is right and that they understand the technology, they're investing in the experts, it's foolhardy. Why would you spend all that money in R&D and not work with the partners that are going to take it to market? So I think manufacturers have a big responsibility as well to prepare their partners for these new technologies. We certainly view it that way.